Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining this Snowflake-led webinar. What we're going to do is we're going to wait about another 60 seconds for more people to join the webinar, and then we'll kick off the webinar, so please stay tuned. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started here. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this Snowflake webinar featuring Metromile, which offers pay-per-mile affordable insurance for low mileage drivers, and also Stitch, a Talend company, which offers a cloud-first, developer-focused platform for rapidly moving data. First up will be Satish Koteshwar, the VP of Data for Metromile, who has over 20 years working in the data management space, including ETL and business intelligence tools, data warehousing, and analytics technologies. He'll talk about his experience migrating to Snowflake and the benefits he's seen from using it for data warehouse, data lake, and data engineering workloads. He'll also talk about how he uses Stitch to help with ETL and data movement. I'm also joined by Garrett O'Brien, a senior product marketing manager at Stitch, who will talk about their solutions. And I'm Joe Goldberg, director of product marketing at Snowflake, the leading cloud data platform. Please ask any and all questions throughout the duration of the webinar via the electronic Q&A panel in the On24 panel, or UI, I should say, and then we're going to leave plenty of time at the end of the webinar to answer all your questions. And when asking a question, please state which speaker it's directed to, Metromile, Stitch, or Snowflake. So Satish, without further ado, off to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you for the introduction there. Just want to give some folks some background on Metromile. Metromile is a pay-per-mile auto insurance company. Think of it like your utility bills. You pay what you use for your water, your electricity. The same concept applied to auto insurance. It's a pay-per-mile model. And works especially well when you have folks who don't drive as much. We noticed that in a lot of cities, people don't actually drive much, and people were looking for a cost-effective auto insurance solution. So Metromile was born out of that idea to kind of serve those customers who are looking for an effective auto insurance solution, but without having to pay hefty prices. How Metromile works, is when you sign up for Metromile, we ship you a device which you plug into your car. The device is called as a Pulse device. This essentially keeps track of how much you drive. And ultimately, at the end of the month, your bill consists of two pieces. One is a monthly rate, and another one is a variable component, which depends on how much you drive. And a total of the two kind of gives you your monthly bill. In the current days, we see that not a lot of people are driving. So it's a really fantastic model for people who are looking for a cost-effective auto insurance solution. We currently operate in about 8 states with plan to expand to other states in the near future. Let me dive a little bit deeper into some of our challenges and how we went about solving some of those things. So this is a typical scenario that you would probably find in many organizations where you have a lot of different data sources available across your organization. You also have different places where data lives. The data is somewhat federated. And people who are looking to analyze this information usually have to kind of either go through the difficulty of figuring out how to put these pieces of data together, or sometimes they have to wait for some of these components to be built in the enterprise data warehouse in order to be fully accessible and available to the organization. Some of this work is complex and time-consuming, if sometimes we see that people kind of do this in silos many times across the organization. One of the challenges that we also had at Metromile was some of our sources from where people used to query the data. For example, we had a Postgres data warehouse, and some of our data assets lived in Redshift, etc. They were pretty slow to query and get the results back. We had several challenges in terms of managing performance and just the user experience around it. And the very nature of data being somewhat federated gives you some challenges from a maintenance perspective, because you have integrations which are working in several different places, and it's hard to kind of manage and operationalize a lot of those things. So this was a problem that we were kind of working with, and we were like, hey, how do we solve this problem? And that is how we kind of came across Stitch, which is a Talend product, as well as Snowflake. And I'll cover a little bit of how we kind of solved some of these challenges on our side. So we used a couple of different ways to kind of get data across our organization consolidated into our Snowflake environment. First and foremost, we had a lot of different databases, MySQL, Postgres, SQL Server, you name it. We had a bunch of different sources kind of federated across the organization. We also have external data which comes from like third-party solution systems or from spreadsheets or from any local databases, etc. Think of this as master data or any supplemental information we might use for analytics. We also hooked it up to Stitch to bring it into our Snowflake environment. We also have a lot of SaaS sources. For example, we have third-party, providers who send us data. Like, for example, our customer messaging platform is a SaaS source from which we receive data. We have Salesforce from which we pull data as well. So all these sources essentially are connected to Stitch. And what this enables us to do is acquire any new data source pretty reliably and pretty quickly into our analytics ecosystem. So anytime we have a new data source, all we need to do is figure out how to connect it to Stitch and essentially set it up for pushing the data out to us. Stitch is a data replication solution which takes data from sources and pushes it down to our Snowflake environment. And there are two things that it does really, really well for us. One, it makes the process of acquiring any data across the organization or even outside our organization somewhat easy. So the Stitch UI itself is relatively straightforward, easy to kind of set up. And the second thing it does is it gets us all this data into our Snowflake environment, which is an extremely powerful environment to query data. So prior, we used to have a situation where we had to query our sources, and we had several limitations on the source side, like some of the indexes are probably not accurate. In many cases, we would not have reliable date and timestamps to kind of work with. So Stitch essentially helps solve a lot of those challenges for us in terms of acquiring data easily, getting reliable date timestamps, because we use a lot of database logs for replication. So we can accurately track when records were updated and inserted or deleted in our source system. So it kind of opens up a lot of options for us in terms of being able to get data in a reliable fashion for downstream integration-related purposes, but also helps build a really, really nice audit trail in our data, which has been a big win for us. I was talking a little bit about our devices, which our customers receive. We get streaming data from those devices as well. Currently, we use one of the features in Snowflake called Snowpipe, which enables us to ingest any data from any of our Amazon S3 buckets and store all that data within Snowflake. So this combination of Stitch and Snowflake has been really powerful for us in terms of acquiring any structured data sources across the organization, any SaaS data sources, as well as any sort of streaming data solutions that we're looking for. We are able to kind of do that fairly easily as well. So this has kind of helped solve a lot of the challenges we have had in terms of providing reliable data and providing data in a consolidated fashion from different sources in a single place for our stakeholders and for across the organization. Few factors around why we chose Snowflake and why we chose Talend. We really like Snowflake for a bunch of different factors. Snowflake was really great from a scalability perspective. And I'll kind of give you guys some metrics on this in the next slide. But the ability to kind of scale up and down pretty seamlessly and pretty easily was one of the biggest factors that helped us quite a bit. Before Snowflake, we had instances where some of our processing of data or just the query response times for our users were extremely slow. Being able to solve issues around scalability, performance, and concurrency were actually really nice. And the way the Snowflake architecture is built up, where the whole compute and storage is somewhat disconnected, it allows us to kind of build really nice swim lanes where we have dedicated set of resources for different task processing. So for example, you can have set of resources dedicated for your ETL processing pipelines, but then you can have separate resources set up for querying activities for users, etc. And by kind of setting up these swim lanes, we can avoid any sort of resource contention and provide a very superior user experience. So that is something that we have been able to achieve pretty well with Snowflake. Snowflake also provides native support for both structured and semi-structured data, which has been really wonderful. Otherwise, as folks who are working in this field of data can attest that working with semi-structured data isn't always the easiest. Being able to store semi-structured data and provide native SQL support to query semi-structured data has been a really fantastic feature that is there in Snowflake. And a few other features which I think is really good is there is audits for every query that is fired on the Snowflake platform. Platform is absolutely low maintenance, and we literally spend no time on administration. The one feature which I kind of missed in here was also time travel functionalities, where many times business comes to you and says, I need to see how numbers are developing, and you need to be able to kind of snapshot different pieces of information. The time travel functionality in Snowflake has been a real blessing for us, where we can kind of turn on time travel on either a table or a schema, and we are able to essentially track all the different changes. On the flip side, Talend, which has been a great partner for us, has really complemented Snowflake really well in our implementation. It has helped us get data assets in a much, much faster fashion. And the support has been really great. Like if you go to the Stitch website, there is a tiny chat window on the right-hand corner, and that is a way to kind of reach out support. And I've yet to come across another vendor who has such an easy format to reach out to support. So that ease of access to the support and just general partnership in terms of helping resolve issues and ensuring that we are successful has been really great from the Talend Stitch community. The third part is really simplicity. We were looking for a solution which can be super simple, both from a user standpoint as well as from an overall solution standpoint. We wanted to ensure that the solution works. We wanted to ensure we went through all scenarios where we can take out the source, we can take out our replication provider, we can take out our targets, and we wanted to ensure that still, if something goes down, the solution still kind of works seamlessly and efficiently. And we found Stitch to be doing exactly that. So that was one of the big reasons why we ultimately chose Stitch along with our Snowflake instance. And lastly, a few other things like, it was a really simple licensing model. We had very predictable costs, which I think is pretty important for us. And I would say the biggest impact with Stitch has been our response time to acquiring data assets has been really great. And Stitch has been working very reliably for us for a lot of our different projects. And it has really helped form the foundational layer of our analytics platform. So that's why Stitch has been a real beneficial add to our entire stack. And it is hard to find two different sets of technologies which usually work really well hand in hand. For us, this combination of Stitch, which is a Talend company, and Snowflake seems to work really well. And till date, we haven't really had any major issues. We have seen great partnerships between Talend and Snowflake as well. So that combination has been a very, very strong one. So if you're in a situation where you're looking to kind of figure out how do you make the general process of accessing data across your organization simpler, straightforward, I would definitely recommend looking at Stitch and Snowflake. And in the next slide, I'll cover a few of our metrics. So these are some some instances where we have had some really good success with both Stitch and Snowflake. I'll kind of walk through some of them. We have a SQL Server database instance where we have about 1,500 tables, and you can ask a data engineer, like, how time consuming it will be to kind of bring those data, and not just bring it to an instance, but also kind of keep it completely synced up to the source is a hard task. And we currently do that very seamlessly and very easily with Stitch. So we bring this on a daily basis, and there's a lot of information across those 1,500 tables which are valuable for our business. Stitch not only ensures that we bring that volume of data easily, but it also ensures that it is brought over reliably. So that has been a big factor. We also use Stitch for integrating our customer messaging platform to Snowflake, just so that we can get metrics on, hey, when are people opening their emails? How many messages are they responding to, etc. And this is a case where we actually finished the entire integration in under 10 minutes, and we were able to test it out and ensure that the data works end to end. So that was a pretty big win for us, being able to kind of get that wrapped up so fast with Stitch. And lastly, one more thing with Stitch is we had a lot of challenges from a business standpoint where our metrics were moving. We did not have reliable date timestamps sometimes in our source systems. And we use this feature called log-based replication, which is looking at database logs and replaying that on Snowflake. So not only are we able to query the database logs rather than the databases themselves, we are able to get reliable date and timestamps, which have saved a ton of effort for my team, so that we are able to build reliable analytics without really having to ask a ton of re-architecture from an engineering perspective. So that is probably one of the biggest wins that we got out of the Stitch platform. On the Snowflake side, Snowflake, I'll kind of cover some of the wins there. Now, we use Snowflake for a lot of different purposes, but just the general performance on the Snowflake side has been really, really fantastic. For folks who are new to Snowflake, the node sizes in Snowflake come in like t-shirt sizes. So it goes from extra small to small, medium, large. So from that standpoint, we run a lot of our data processing on extra small node. And we have noticed our integration process running really, really fast. So in some cases, in our source system, we don't have the necessary indexes or necessary partitions, perhaps. But bringing it to Snowflake kind of allows us to work around a lot of those limitations. So an example here is we used to have this really large process which used to query a table which had billions of transactions in it. Just the extract process would run for 7 hours. Now it runs under 3 minutes on a really small node, extra small node. Our end-to-end processes, integration process now complete in under 4 hours, compared to some of our traditional process, which used to take 20 plus hours on the legacy platform. And legacy platform, we had a ton of resource contention issues where tables would get locked due to like querying activity and situations like that. Having dedicated swim lanes has allowed us to kind of circumvent a lot of those kind of issues in Snowflake, provide superior access to our users, and just a really seamless experience. And we have had no table locking issues or something or any issues like that because of the Snowflake architecture, which has been really great. And lastly, the native functionality to query semi-structured data. It has saved a lot of time. In many situations, we have had scenarios where people have had to query that data. And being able to query that data without really needing any sort of help from anyone in our engineering team has been a big help for some of our end users. So these are some scenarios where we've had some really great wins with Stitch and some really great wins with Snowflake. Some of these pain points that I kind of talked about are probably common pain points based on my work experience. And I think we've been able to kind of solve some of these issues in a very practical way. So I'm happy to kind of answer any questions if you guys have any. But I think I'm going to transition this over to the Talend team so that they can cover a little bit more of their product suite. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Satish. I'm going to go ahead and advance this if you don't mind. I think that's such a cool story, and it's one that we're no strangers to, right? The idea of needing rapid access to data. And I just love how Satish and the data team at MetroMile were able to both integrate and test and put into production their data from the customer messaging platform in 10 minutes. I think in the terms of data teams at your average company, anything that you can measure in 10 minutes is just awesome. And as I mentioned, I think it's something that we're no stranger to, especially around what would typically be called ETL. And as part of the Stitch team and now with Talend, we hear a lot from customers out in the market or folks looking for what they would term an ETL solution. You know the story, right? Customer comes and says, I'd like to extract, transform, and load data into my data warehouse for analysis. But if you zoom out for a second, I think you'll also find that often the idea of ETL really means I want to access usable data quickly, right? Especially with the advent of Snowflake and the query performance that Satish was talking about. Behind the scenes of all of that is the ability to access usable data. So you start with something that is framed as a technical problem, but dig a little bit deeper and it becomes clear that needing rapid access to usable data is a business problem. So you wanted to perform analytics on your customer messaging platform. Do you have that data readily available in a usable format? And what if you scale that out across other SaaS applications, say several or a dozen, and then multiply that by the number of API breaking changes that would be deployed across those applications? And you can start to get a picture of what the average data team is facing, just in terms of extracting data and getting it into a usable format for analytics with Snowflake. And lurking behind all of this stuff, Satish mentioned a little bit of the maintenance pains that they had at MetroMile around code. And that's something that we see a lot too. Every time that you have to rip something out that was built on a legacy platform, again, every time that there is a breaking change deployed against a third-party API or the delivery requirements change, those are precious data engineering resources being spent maintaining programs and maintaining pieces of code that aren't adding net new value to data teams and to the business. And that's where Stitch comes in. And as Satish mentioned and Joe did as well, we're now a Talend company, which is incredibly exciting. But what we're adding to the portfolio and to our customers on a standalone basis as well is code data ingestion tool built for the cloud. So Satish mentioned the UI. I think that's sort of our pride and joy a little bit, is the ability for anyone to easily access data. It's built in such a way that we've abstracted a lot of what you might call the back-end data engineering type work and made that more accessible to the same type of person that would be working in SQL and Snowflake can now access that data using Stitch. And the whole point of this, right, is to quickly enable analytics. Again, every hour spent writing Python code to extract data from the source is time spent not creating new reporting, not deriving insight from data in Snowflake with analytics tools, and ultimately not moving a business or project forward. And the other way that we've done that for teams around the world is by making this whole proposition automatically scalable. So there's no infrastructure to manage with Stitch. We'll never ask you to do any of the scaling work behind delivering that data for your team. It's all done automatically. In terms of connectivity, we're supporting a growing list of over 100 data sources. We're adding new ones constantly. One of the other exciting things about our list of supported data sources is that they're all built on an open source project called Singer.io. And the reason that we developed Singer is to, one, give our customers and users total clarity into how we're handling APIs from third parties, should any questions arise, but then also to give a community the ability to develop and deploy their own integrations with the Singer framework. We have a Slack community of, I think it's now over 3,000 contributors, which is awesome. And you can find the Singer.io project on GitHub or at Singer.io. But aside from Singer, we're also, within the Stitch product itself, fully managing the data pipeline, right? So all of these 100+ data sources, including Salesforce, Google Ads, Postgres, Shopify, and many more, are being fully managed through the Stitch platform for rapid replication into a cloud data warehouse like Snowflake. So I think that's really exciting because it's taking a lot of the work off of the plate of that would normally be writing programs against those APIs to extract data, transform it, and then load it into Snowflake. Whoops, a little animation fun in here with On24. One other thing to note is that Stitch is part of the Talend Data Fabric. So we're getting closer with the rest of the Talend platform to become more unified, available across more than just the integration scenarios that Stitch services, right? Those 100 sources to the 8 or so target data warehouses and data lakes. Our ability to continue merging with the Talend Data Fabric means that customers will have access to any point integration, the data governance and data quality capabilities of the wider Talend suite, and the ability to extend across integration scenarios that cover on-prem and cloud deployments. And lastly, the Talend Data Fabric itself encompasses a fully integrated, always-on and solution for data management and data integration, covering features like smart data quality, data governance, and again, the ability to deploy those functions across on-premise, hybrid, and cloud scenarios with a unified, flexible, and scalable platform. And what I always tell folks is, if you're interested at all in what that Stitch UI looks like or how easy it can be to start replicating data into Snowflake, check us out at stitchdata.com. We offer a 14-day free trial during that period, including unlimited data volume to move to Snowflake. I promise you it is sincerely super easy. It takes me about 5 minutes in my demo. So would love for us to try that out. Let me know if you have any questions in the Q&A. And with that, I will turn it back over to Joe at Snowflake.
Great. Can you hear me okay, Garrett?
Yeah, we got you.
Excellent. So before I jump into the final section here on Snowflake, just a friendly reminder to everyone to please submit electronic Q&A in the On24 panel. And you can address it to Satish/Metromile, Garrett, Stitch, and then also myself for Snowflake, because we're going to leave time at the end for that. So, okay, we'll jump into the Snowflake slides here. And Satish, you made my life easier because you already talked about a lot of the goodness of Snowflake here. But anyhow, so Snowflake, we are a cloud data platform. And you can see here on the slide, essentially we can take in data from common data sources in an organization on the left. You can stream it in, you can batch it in, you can ETL it in, you can use custom scripts, you name it. It's stored in Snowflake there in the blue. And then once the data is in Snowflake, it's essentially one copy of the data. But you can do many workloads on top of that data, and I'll talk about those on the next slide. And on the right, we truly democratize data to all your data consumers in the organization. So, your BI users, your data science users for reporting, dashboarding, analytics, you name it. And then what's also a bit unique about Snowflake is, we are offered up as a service, so just a simple URL to access our service. And when you use Snowflake or when you create an account, you get to pick the cloud provider of your choice. We run on Google Cloud, AWS, and Azure. So we're truly cross-cloud. And you can also, it's worth pointing out, Snowflake can be replicated across regions and clouds. So you could have, let's say, Google Cloud in the US as your primary, replicated to, say, Azure in Europe. So you really have, true replication across cloud providers. In terms of the workloads, that's what's listed here. So it's one platform, one copy of data, many workloads. And the Metro Mile story Satish walked through really hits on the first three there: data warehousing, data lake, and data engineering. So if you take a step back, the point of a data lake, it's really three things you're doing, you're trying to accomplish. It's storage, transformations, and analysis, if you really want to simplify it. And that would map back to kind of the data lake, data engineering, and data warehousing workloads here with Snowflake. And on the right, we also do support data science teams. You can build data applications on top of Snowflake. We're the back end. And then we do have data exchange functionality, where with one click, you can share data in one of your databases and tables with anyone else who has a Snowflake account. Doesn't matter where they are in the world or in what region. They get access to the same fresh live data that's in your Snowflake instance. So we call ourselves a cloud data platform, and we see this as being the requirements of a cloud data platform. So again, it's a single platform that can hold all your data, and Satish covered this, but by all the data, we mean structured and semi-structured, like JSON, Parquet, Avro. Some prior data platforms / data warehouses could not handle semi-structured data, but Snowflake handles it very well. Point two there has to be secure and governed access to data, things like roles-based access control and encryption, single sign-on, MFA, and all that has to be present. Point three there should be offered up as a service with near zero maintenance. And with Snowflake, we are essentially a DBA under the covers. So you don't have to do anything like partitioning or vacuuming or indexing or manual search optimization. We do that all for you with our technology. So, DBAs and data engineers can spend time on value-add tasks like finding and onboarding new data and not just, trying to maintain the system. And then the last point here, cloud data platform has to offer unlimited performance and scale. And Satish touched on this, but Snowflake, we have a very unique architecture that enables that. So it's a multi-cluster shared storage architecture where basically every workload, whether it's an ETL job, a transformation, or a query, gets its own dedicated compute if needed. So there's no resource contention. Everyone can do anything they want in Snowflake at any time. And we leverage the underlying hardware of the cloud providers, and that gives basically unlimited storage, unlimited compute. Because last I checked, these guys are not going to run out of storage anytime soon or compute. And what's great with Snowflake is with a couple clicks in our UI, you can literally assign up to 1,024 EC2 nodes or Azure VM nodes to a single query or transform or ETL job in Snowflake, and then scale it back down in seconds. So imagine trying to do that in the physical world, trying to get 1,024 boxes lined up. With Snowflake, again, do that in seconds automatically. So very performant. Some problems with data lakes are listed here, and these were touched on a bit before, but with a lot of data lakes, you have copies of data. You've got your raw data curated. Sometimes the data has to be sent to a data warehouse because the data lake doesn't do analytics well. So you have a lot of copies of data. Sometimes it's hard to figure out what's the single source of truth. You also have limited slow analytics because, again, some data lakes are really just files exposed on cloud storage. And if you point a SQL query engine at that, it's not going to perform well. They're also very complex and costly. It's a lot of technologies to integrate, especially if you're using a lot of third-party tools and open source tools. Just a lot of work to integrate it all and maintain it, make sure it's all up and running. And then the last one is unsecure and ungoverned. So each tool is part of your data lake, and you could have many. They each may have different security controls and policies, and it's hard to secure and govern all these different data flows as data is moving between files and folders and buckets and different technologies. So that's an issue. And ultimately, a lot of folks we talked to who went down the road with the traditional data lake, they say, it was just so hard to go from raw data to analysis that most of our data we dumped in there never got analyzed. So we didn't realize the value of the data. Our data lake was the proverbial data swamp. So what we really need, and this is why Snowflake was developed, we were built based on what our customers asked for, is you need a data lake and a data warehouse, but ideally all in one. Because the data lake is good at what's listed here on the slide, things like cheap storage, semi-structured data, schema on read, but it is not good at doing what a traditional data warehouse does. It's not good at doing fast analytics, reporting and queries, also doesn't do well with structured data. And then again, things like security, governance, asset transaction compliance are a bit weak with in a data lake. So Snowflake, we can do all this, right? We check the boxes on everything, and including semi-structured data, we have a file type called variant, so you can put in all your unmodified semi-structured data with no schema when you put it into Snowflake, and then you can query it with SQL.notation. So we meet all the requirements here for a data lake and data warehouse in one. And this slide here is kind of how we're the solution. And this is essentially the opposite of the prior slide I showed you. So with Snowflake, the data is consolidated. You don't have, it's all within Snowflake. So again, we're the sort of the data lake and data warehouse in one. So it's not just the storage, but also the analytics are built in, so everyone can easily access the data. It's democratized. And also, it's important to point out you can do transformations of data within Snowflake. You can either just do it writing, stored procedures and functions, but we also have something called streams and tasks, which automates transformations between tables. You can easily throw your raw data into, let's say, table 1, and then use streams and tasks to do merges and inserts and upserts and enrichment, and then point it to a second table, kind of a target table, and then your analytical users run off that second table, which has the clean, curated, transformed data. So we can do that all in one place. And then we have point 2 there, fast scalable analytics, and I talked about our architecture. We are simple and cost effective. Our storage is just a pass-through of the underlying cloud providers. And also, we have very good compression on the data. So it's going to be much more efficient in terms of just raw files. And of course, it's not multiple technologies being kind of cobbled together from different vendors. It's one solution. So much less complex, and we have a lot of the automatic maintenance that I mentioned earlier. So your data DBAs and engineers can focus on more value-add activities. We have security and governance, RBAC, encryption at rest and transit, our keys are your keys, MFA, single sign-on, IP whitelisting, data masking and tokenization, and robust audit trails. Satish talked about those as well for data lineage and governance. So the point is, with Snowflake, the value of the data is fully realized. That data lake is not a swamp. You put data in and insights come out. It's also worth mentioning that we can be a full data lake, or we can complement an existing data lake, because a lot of folks we talk to already have a data lake. It's not going anywhere, or they have a legitimate reason why they want data outside of a Snowflake. Maybe their data science team needs a data lake. So we can complement an existing lake. This moves kind of left to right from sort of a typical customer journey with Snowflake. So on the left, Snowflake's the traditional data warehouse, and the lake feeds clean, curated data into us. Moving over, transforms that may have happened in the lake happen in us, because maybe they were done in the lake with something that's open source, and it was very complex and expensive, and you needed to use Scala or Python. So they do those now inside of Snowflake, where it's you can do it with SQL, so it's easier to do, and also you can use our elastic architecture, so it's faster and it's simpler. Column 3 there is, then what you could do is, if you needed to, you could output some of that transformed clean data back to the lake, and we can export the data as Parquet, XML, JSON if needed. So then some of your consumers who need direct access to the lake can then get access to this transformed data. So we're kind of a transform engine. And the last one is where Snowflake essentially is the full data lake. So we can, again, complement your lake if you already have an existing investment there. Some features that can help if you're a Snowflake customer. A lot of these will resonate with you. You probably are using these. But again, we mentioned we can adjust semi-structured data, which is a data lake requirement. We also have something called external tables. So you can point Snowflake tables at external tables on your data lake and go ahead and query it. That's one option, so it's kind of a SQL query engine. But better than that is you do a materialized view over an external table. So we will sync up to the external table, essentially suck up the data from it, and then store it inside of the Snowflake table. So it's much more performant, and we'll sync with that external table on your lake. And optionally, you can use the Hive connector for that. So if you're using Apache Hive as your sort of your metastore, your metadata repository for your data lake, Snowflake can integrate that to understand your table structures on your lake. There's streams and tasks there. Column 4, which I mentioned, can do sort of CDC on tables to see net new data being added to them, and then tasks then perform SQL operations on that data to then transform it and pass it on to target tables. We have connectors to Kafka to get in streaming data, connectors to Spark, so Spark can read from Snowflake or write to it. And then we have something called Snowpipe, which can automatically monitor cloud storage buckets and micro-batch the data from those into Snowflake, so your data is fresh and accurate. If you want to learn more, snowflake.com product has more information on the different workloads, and also snowflake.com resources has a lot of resources there that you can leverage. So we'll pivot over to the Q&A part at this point, and again, feel free to submit Q&A. So a lot came in while I was talking, so I'm going to try to play catch up here, and I'm going to go ahead and redirect these questions to either myself or Satish and Garrett. So you guys can unmute yourselves. And let's see here. So, and I'm just going to kind of go down these in no particular order. But Satish, so why did you choose Snowflake as the data lake over just raw S3 buckets?
That's a great question. I've seen and I've worked at many places where data lives in your S3 environment. One of the big challenges from that perspective is how do you make that data accessible to your business users and so on. The one great option we found in Snowflake is that you can have a lot of data sitting in Snowflake, but even if you have data sitting in your S3 buckets, you can still create an external table within Snowflake, which you can essentially open up that S3 data for querying purposes. So imagine, let's say you have a database and you want to kind of tie that to some data in your S3, you can do that through Snowflake. So even in our situation, like we have a lot of data sitting within Snowflake, but there are parts of data which perhaps like, hey, we have some, old data sets which are no longer accurate. Those sit in S3. But since we create those as external tables, it is still kind of accessible through the Snowflake layer. So we technically, in many cases, don't even have to get the data into Snowflake, but having it sit into S3 and being able to query that data through Snowflake has been a great user experience. So just from a point of view of making a smooth, seamless user experience, we decided to kind of centralize everything in Snowflake.
Gotcha. Okay, let's see here. So one of them here is, it just says here, ingesting the data in a Snowflake would be the first step. How easy or difficult was it for you to get insights from the data lake, especially for curated data? And I think I touched on that, but maybe you can add to that, Satish, getting insights.
Absolutely. So I think one of the nice things that we have found is, especially moving to Snowflake, we have been able to kind of move to more of a ELT architecture rather than an ETL architecture. So essentially, a lot of our transformations right now happen in one place. So essentially, being able to kind of get value out of that and provide faster insights to the business has been really great. I think in many situations, the process of acquiring data has become much more straightforward now. So essentially, working with something new is much simpler. I'll give you a small example. Like right now, we're going through a project where we are changing some of our systems, and the systems haven't gone live yet, but we already have it hooked up to Stitch and already kind of selected everything that we need to kind of bring into our analytics environment. So that's the kind of speed it kind of enables us to do, where getting access to information and kind of moving that faster, it's a much different experience now.
Gotcha. Okay. So another question came in here. Let me scroll down and find it here. Yeah, it says, to use Satish, you're using Snowflake as a data lake where you're loading data from all the sources to Snowflake. How are you making sense of all the data dumps? Is there more sort of quote ETL within Snowflake and combining all of them?
Yeah, exactly. So, so we have within Snowflake, you can have different databases. So one of the databases, we have it for getting all our raw data as it is. But we also have other databases where we process information and kind of store it in a somewhat structured format, where we go through the process of cleansing the data and transforming the data and storing it in a fashion which is easier for business analysis. So, and you can logically separate those things within Snowflake, which is nice. And you can have different permissions on each database where you can, say, hey, I need somebody to have like access to do more things in one database versus the other. So you can do a lot of those kind of access permissions related stuff as well.
Gotcha. Okay, another question for you, Satish, is just if the data in Snowflake doesn't match source systems, of course the BI will be inaccurate. How do you ensure data accuracy?
That's a good question. So since in many cases we use log-based replication, which is basically looking at database logs and replaying that back onto our Snowflake instance, in many cases where our numbers don't match, it's usually some logic-related issue. We have hardly found issues where the system doesn't match the source. We actually had a very interesting one a few days back where some of our ETL processes were failing and we couldn't find that data in our source. Apparently, some of the data actually got deleted, but we were able to track and kind of log all of that in our Snowflake instance. So we were able to say, hey, looks like some data disappeared, what happened and why it happened. And we were able to track all that. We've actually had very few instances of data not matching, especially with log-based replication. It's been super reliable.
Great. Another question is, do you have any sort of ROI or future ROI metrics around using Snowflake/Stitch?
We do. However, I don't really have them handy. We put this analysis together when we were initially making the case for building our new analytics stack. I do not have those updated numbers with me, but a lot of our, in case of Stitch, I would definitely say like it's literally like, in a matter of like days and hours where you can kind of get a lot of things kind of up and running. In case of Snowflake, it was slightly more longer for us in terms of return on investment, simply because we had to not just get the data, but we also had to build our integration processes and all of that. But the speed at which we are kind of building things now, I think has kind of significantly shifted our ROI numbers. I definitely think we're getting pretty good return compared to what we used to spend on some of our legacy stack. So definitely, for organizations who are looking at this from a ROI perspective, definitely pretty good. It's a pretty good option. I would also encourage people to look at, your total ownership, cost of ownership, kind of look at your operational aspects, administration aspects as well, because those are things where we do not really spend a lot of time at the moment. So pretty big benefits from that perspective too.
Great. And here's one for, I guess, for Snowflake and Stitch. And I'll pass this to you, Garrett, first. But to what extent do you see IoT customers using Stitch?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think not to the level that it would be a native integration. So I don't think, I think that if you have an existing database or a data lake like an S3 that you would be using regarding IoT workloads, Stitch can certainly move that data into Snowflake. But we don't natively support many IoT sources.
Gotcha. And I know for Snowflake, on our end, we definitely ingest a lot of IoT data from a lot of customers. I mean, usually it's semi-structured data, IoT data, so we can very easily ingest it, and it's a big sort of growth area for us. Okay. And yeah, so Garrett, this is an easy one. Is Stitch a separate product that can be purchased alone?
Give me the softball. Yes, absolutely. Head to stitchdata.com, and we do have quite a bit of flexible pricing available for our customers.
Gotcha. And then the question's also coming in around, like, if Snowflake can do basic transformations, how is it different than Stitch? And I'll just say right now, Snowflake generically, we're definitely a data warehouse, a data lake. We are not in kind of an ETL tool or a data cataloging tool, and we certainly don't touch the E part the extract. That's really where a lot of our ETL partners shine. Is they have massive libraries of connectors to pull in data from lots of data sources. So that's also a big distinction. Is we partner with them very heavily, and vice versa. So they're helping pull in the data, and then we help do the analysis. But maybe you can also touch on that too, Garrett. Sort of the differences between the two.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it goes to another question, which asked about how Stitch would compare with another data integration tool. And really, we're focused on the extraction and loading of data. So we have a good many customers that are doing exactly what you mentioned, Joe, which is extracting data with Stitch, loading into Snowflake, and then doing transformation work. So we're really focused on expanding connectivity. And that's where our customers are seeing value in those 100+ connectors.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay. And there's another question came in. I think you just touched on it, but it just is recap on what Stitch does for Snowflake. I think you just nailed that. It's helping get the data from the data sources into Snowflake in a timely manner.
Exactly. Yep.
Gotcha. Okay. Question for you, Satish, is how do you handle PII, like policy numbers, customer PII, et cetera?
That's a good question. When we set up what data we pull from Stitch, you can have very basic, very granular controls in terms of, hey, what fields you want to pull. So you can bring over a table, and let's say if a table has a specific field that you don't want to bring into your ecosystem, you can basically exclude that. So that is one option that we have where, hey, you can basically, when bringing data over, you can basically say, hey, these are sensitive pieces of information which you don't want to bring over, so you can exclude that. In some cases, we cannot exclude that. We kind of bring that over. We have to bring it over. Once you bring it over, there's a couple of different things you can do. One, you can basically define sort of access, and you can manage it through your access and who has access to what. That can be done. Secondly, you can also bring in the data as is, but you can build views on top of that, where you can basically mask that information and only open access to the view. So the underlying data still resides and is hidden from a lot of the users. They can only see like a masked version of that. So let's say if you want to kind of provide a somewhat a masked version of the data to our users, or an encrypted version, you can still do that. I know this is an area which is still kind of, I think there's a lot of features kind of coming on the Snowflake side in the near future. But yeah, I think there is a heavy focus on all these things, given how the industry is kind of trending, especially in terms of managing PII data.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Gotcha. Yeah, and soon we're going to have things like masking and tokenization, which will help with that side of Snowflake. So just a couple of Snowflake questions came in. One is, so someone's saying, this is very specific, but it's saying, we have a certain warehouse size and we want it to be faster. How do we address the issue? And so the short answer is, just kind of generically speaking with Snowflake, is warehouses can size up. So sometimes sizing up a warehouse will help with a job. Sometimes, though, the issue is you actually need a multi-cluster warehouse if the challenge is concurrency. Sometimes the issue may actually be not even the warehouse. Maybe just you're writing a SQL query inefficiently. Maybe you should be doing materialized views instead of hitting a raw table. Maybe you should implement automatic clustering. So in other words, it's hard for me to answer how to improve performance in the system. That would be good to have a conversation with Snowflake, and very quickly we can look at what you're doing and figure out, oh, here's what you need to do. But usually it's a pretty quick fix to improve performance. Let's see here. And so someone's asking if Snowflake is like an in-memory grid. And the answer is no, not at all. We're not an in-memory grid. Think of us as just an ANSI SQL database sort of structure in the cloud. So we do store data. We persist it on storage like S3, and we will pull it up in a memory SSD if needed. But we're not an in-memory data grid like some other solutions. And also someone's asking about, are we similar to InfoUSA? No, my understanding is InfoUSA is just a content provider, but InfoUSA data is something you could put into Snowflake to then enrich data you have and combine it with other data sources. But no, we don't produce data like InfoUSA does. Satish, would you use anything for data cataloging?
For data cataloging, we have a couple of things we are doing. One, on the table and column levels itself, I think you can put in some metadata around some of these things. Secondly, we actually have a homegrown solution for managing a lot of the cataloging of data and all of that. We kind of look at cataloging as more of a community-driven activity where, it's not like one person owning it. It is driven by like a group of people. So we have something that is more homegrown, but essentially there is a lot of things in the Snowflake, environment which we are kind of leveraging, where you can have comments down to like table and column levels, which is what we've kind of built our solution on top of.
Gotcha. And
I know there are, I'm sorry, there are a lot of other vendors available in the market. We spent a little time exploring it, but not too much.
Gotcha. Question here for Stitch. I guess two quickly, Garrett, does Stitch support replication for Oracle? Is it done using logs? And also, how is Stitch licensed?
Yeah, we do support Oracle via LogMiner. So that would be version specific. I definitely encourage you to contact our support team in the app, and they can help you get you on your way with regards to Oracle. And then we also are a totally SaaS-based consumption model. So no licensing to speak of, everything from monthly low volume requirements for moving data all the way up to enterprise grade with SLAs and advanced product features, but no license model to speak of, all consumption driven. Gotcha.
Okay. And then I'll just quickly, a Snowflake question came in around, do we integrate with SageMaker from AWS? The answer is yes. And frankly, we'll integrate with pretty much any ETL, BI, or data science tool, including, even in the data science space, Data IQ, Data Robot, et cetera. But we partner with most of them, so we have pre-built connectors to optimize the connectivity. And then also we have generic JDBC, ODBC connectors, so we can integrate with pretty much anything you've got in your environment, because those are very two standard / open protocols. So what I'll do here is I'll go do one last question as we're hitting top of the hour. And this is for you, Satish, but it's what kind of data modeling techniques do you use to publish data inside of Snowflake, like dimensional data, Vault, Snowflake, schema, et cetera?
It's actually a combination, I would say, between star and Snowflake schema. I think it kind of varies between that. A lot of our modeling is driven by how business wants to perhaps slice and dice information. So a lot of our core data warehouse, I think, is built in more of a Snowflake schema fashion, where everything is kind of available in one place, etc. And then there are some aggregated views of the data where perhaps it's more stored in an aggregated fashion or in a star schema fashion, which makes it easier for someone in the business community to perhaps put it together.
Gotcha. Great. So I lied. I'll do one more quick question on Snowflake. Someone was just asking about how do you ensure data is always available in Snowflake. There's a couple ways. One is in case of user error, there's something called time travel in Snowflake, where you can basically go back up to 90 days prior to any kind of database object. Someone makes a mistake, you can go back to it. The other thing we offer is called zero-copy cloning, where as you go in Snowflake, you can build zero-copy clones of any database object, including full tables. But what's nice is, as it sounds, it's zero copy. The copy's done at the metadata layer. So you can literally, let's say, every quarter, every month, every week, create clones of your data. So you have this immutable source of truth. You could go back to it, if there's a major failure, but also you could use it for regulatory reasons. So if your auditor wants to show them exactly what your data look like at this point in time, you have it. Also, separately, just under the covers, we leverage availability built into the cloud providers. So all the data in Snowflake, if you're in a region, it's written to 3 different availability zones. And that's done by the cloud providers. And then I also mentioned we do have the ability to do replication within Snowflake across different regions or cloud providers. So even if an entire cloud provider goes down, you still have a failover instance of Snowflake. So a lot of failover availability options there based on whether it's sort of user error or a cloud provider connectivity issue. So with that, let's move to the wrap up here. All right, so with that, we're going to close down the Q&A, a couple comments. Everyone on the line will get a recording of this webinar sent to you via email tomorrow. And I encourage you to look at the right side of the On24 console to see a free trial icon where you can sign up for a free Snowflake 30-day trial. It includes a self-paced tutorial and demo data that you load into Snowflake. And if you follow the tutorial within literally 30 minutes, you'll kind of have that aha moment In that resources module and on 24, you also see a link to our resource library where you can read more Snowflake content or watch on-demand webinars. And also, you can see it here on the slide, but I encourage you to sign up for our product announcements on June 2, where we'll be unveiling our new data cloud and also upcoming new capabilities and innovations. The best way to learn more about Stitch is to sign up for the free Stitch 14-day trial, including unlimited data volume at stitchdata.com, or by finding Stitch within the Snowflake UI in our Partner Connect portal. Lastly, a big thank you goes to our speakers, Satish and Garrett. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. And thank you, audience, for all the great questions. So with that, have a great day, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.